Good morning, everyone. It's Rachel Curtis, the Desert Doula with Ask a Birth Professional. This month, I'm really excited. I am doing my first author interview with Julia Aziz. She is a licensed clinical social worker who has worked as a youth and adult counselor, a new mom's mindfulness group facilitator, and a hospice chaplain. She currently leads classes and silent retreats exploring the bigger questions of self and purpose in addition to caring for her 3 children. So, like I said in the description, as soon as I saw, let's see, what is the first thing on the back here? Let me first tell you the book. I don't know if you can see that, but it is called Lessons of Labor, One Woman's Self-Discovery Through Birth and Motherhood. And then what if instead of trying to avoid the pain and uncertainty of labor, we asked what we could learn from it? This resonated with me in a huge way as a birth worker. Obviously, I think there's a lot that you can get from birth. I think it's a very positive experience. So often, though, it's just shrouded in fear. So, Julia, just to jump right in, can you tell us about your personal relationship with birth, and then talk a little bit about specifically the pain of childbirth?
Sure. So I had always looked forward to childbirth, and I feel thankful for that because I had that legacy from my mother and her mother, my grandmother, who had always told me that it was so wonderful to give birth, and they didn't really talk about the pain too much, or they said, "Oh, you forget about it." And so I had always I always wished to have that opportunity to give birth because it felt to me like a rite of passage as a woman. It felt like just a chance to really connect to those sort of wild, primal animal nature of the body. And so I had a positive attitude towards it, I guess you could say, beforehand. And my first labor, for my first child, I was sort of shocked by the intensity of the pain of it. I guess I knew it was going to be difficult, but I don't know how anyone could have any idea of the intensity of it. And I really fought my way through that whole birth experience. I really was just in resistance and sort of hating it, fighting it. I knew I wasn't supposed to do that. That wasn't what I, was told to do. And I knew that was all, I had a lot of, that was part of what was going on, like sort of the mental agony of it for me was that I had this, because I had this experience, background in meditation, I had this idea that I was going to sort of like Zen my way through it. And that's not what happened at all. I just, I was pissed off and I felt hopeless and desperate. Whereas, and that's part of what sparked my desire to write this book was that that experience really changed I have 3 children, and in the subsequent births by my third child, I really was in more of a place of surrender and was able to, I don't know, I wouldn't call it like, they have those documentaries about orgasmic birth experiences, but I was appreciating it and really going with it. I had surrendered a lot more to the experience of it. And so it was from my first birth to my third, by the third, I honestly did not feel that much pain. And a lot of that was because I wasn't in resistance to it and because it went super fast. So
Right.
once it really started going. So, but that's my experience. Everyone's is completely different.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Just most women, I feel like they hear about the pain and they just want to avoid it at all costs. So I always feel like there's something that you kind of miss there. Do you have any thoughts about, let's say if you had, immediate pain relief with all of your children, what, maybe you would have missed out on?
Yeah.
What you wouldn't have that you have now.
Right. I think in general, there's a real benefit to learning how to tolerate pain, like not even just tolerate, but to being able to sit with pain. I think as a culture, we're constantly looking for ways to avoid it, any kind of pain, emotional pain, physical pain. It's a part of life. Like there's no getting around it. Being a human being is going to involve painful experiences. So I feel like there's a real strength and sense of oneself that can happen just being able to be with pain and not be trying to make it go away. And the thing with childbirth is that the pain of it is for a reason, it's for a purpose, it's not wrong, you know, it's not that something's, I mean, sometimes something has gone awry and someone's in danger, but a lot of times it's just, that's what the process is of birthing, you know, involves this extreme discomfort. And so I know I felt, you know, after my first birth, I felt more, I just was sort of in shock and couldn't really even process the experience. But you know, later on, I really came to, I will call on those experiences sometimes if I'm going through something difficult in life, whether that's emotional or definitely physical discomfort or pain. And I'll say to myself, you know, I went through childbirth, I can do this. You know, and it's like there's some like inner sense of myself, inner strength that I feel like that those experiences gave me.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so in your book, your recollections are extremely vivid, and I know I read that you took notes, I believe, pretty soon after. So why did you write down notes, and at what point did you do that about the labors themselves?
Basically within hours, really. And it wasn't that I was necessarily planning on that. I mean, for one thing, I'm somebody who keeps a journal throughout my whole life. I've been doing that. So I write about, you know, sort of significant experiences. But with my first baby, I was so blown away by how it just was so different than I thought it would be. And I was I felt like I was watching my body do this thing and my mind was separate from it. And there was so much going on, and it felt so much like a mirror to what happens for me in the rest of my life. I mean, so that's sort of where the seed or the birth of the idea for this book and the structure of it came, was that I just knew there was so much that had happened in that, how many hours that was, I haven't really counted, but you know, in that brief period of about a day, so much had gone on emotionally and spiritually as well as physically. So I couldn't sleep at all. And this happened after each one of my births. I kind of got manic for some days. So I literally didn't sleep for a week after each of them, like not even for 10 minutes. So that first night after my son was born, sometime in the wee morning hours, I just sat there and wrote it all out while I was waiting for him to wake up his next time or something like that. And then I think that happened after the next two as well. Again, insomnia gave me some writing space. Yeah, and I had already, like, I didn't necessarily have an idea I was going to write a book about it. But as you know, in the months following my first baby being born, I just really saw how significant that experience was, just how much of a metaphor it was for how I dealt with my life, like in terms of being in resistance, wanting to control something and not knowing how it's going to go, and how it just sort of forced me. And I think also it was that new motherhood was even more of a shock than childbirth. So the whole thing felt to me like a huge lesson in surrender.
Yep, that sounds familiar. Well, let's go ahead. You kind of touched on it a little bit. So let's go ahead and talk about, you know, what the process was like writing the book, and then also like just how you have it laid out, because it has a unique structure to it.
Yeah, so the structure is sort of what the whole idea is that there's 4 sections. I had a miscarriage before my first baby. And so I'm kind of at the beginning of each very short chapter, which hopefully is readable for especially a new mom, is that I'm sort of slowly telling the story of each birth and kind of using what I learned from that, or what that experience was, as a metaphor for something I needed to learn in life. And a lot of these things, I mean, this is personal to me, but I've found that a lot of people have resonated with it. So it's also just, I think, part of the human experience of facing uncertainty and pain and learning how to trust. So, so yeah, the process, I mean, a good number of years, I guess it must have been about 6 years or so, I was kind of just writing here and there. I just write notes about ideas that I had about that. But I was too sleep deprived and worn out to like really focus on it. And sometime after when my daughter, my third child was born, I think I listened to a TED Talk about 30-day challenges. And I was like, I'm going to work on this. And so for 30 days, I started writing every day and really working on it, because the idea had always been there about this sort of like 4 major sections of my miscarriage and 3 births, and I was going to tell the story and relate it to life. But I hadn't really put it together. So I started working on it, and I got on a roll, and I was like, okay, I'm going to keep doing it. And then I sort of unexpectedly got a job offer, and it was like that threw me off that writing schedule somewhat. But for the next 2 years, I really did work on it, maybe not every day, but regularly, until it was a rough enough draft to submit to a publisher.
Mm-hmm. So just, for example, let's see, you go through each of the labors, and then there's a title. So this first one you've already mentioned, obviously, is a big theme: resistance. And so there's, a short paragraph or two on like what was actually going on at a particular moment in a labor. And then there's sort of, a brief, 1 or 2 lines of what you learned from that. And then you have a story from, life, and I think often it's motherhood, where you sort of, where you apply that more regularly. So there are several dozen of these lessons in here. And so this is probably a hard question, but if you had to pick one, which would you say was the most powerful or, perhaps life-changing for you?
I have to say that these are sort of reoccurring lessons. So I wouldn't say I've mastered everything in this book now. And I think that they come up for me at different times of life, of what's needed. And I would say right now, where I'm at in my life right now, I kind of was skimming through it before we talked. And what is most useful to me right now is the chapter called Finding the Pause. And it's just about, in the birth story, it's about learning like, oh, there's a pause between contractions. I can just relax between these contractions. I'm not in pain in between. And right now, my life is so full that there's not this, like, I haven't had like a weekend to just chill out and sleep and, go at my own pace in a very long time. And so I need to find the pauses where they naturally exist. Like my son had to stay home sick, and then his dad took him to school, and it was like, there were 10 minutes there, and it's like, here's my 10 minutes, and like being able to like go more deeply into relaxation in smaller amounts of time, and kind of really about being fully present with what's there, and breathing. Always important.
Yes. Okay, so who should read this book? Who's someone who should pick it up, and the kind of person that's really going to benefit from it?
I think anybody who struggles some with anxiety and wanting to control things, I think it could be useful for. I've heard from different people in all ranges, both women that are mothers farther down the line, and even some men. But I'd say women who have younger children, I think it could be most useful for. In some ways, I feel like if I were going to redo it, I might change the title, because it's not really about pregnancy, and it's not a how-to book for labor whatsoever. And I think that a lot of it has to do with learning from that experience, but it's really more about what motherhood does to a woman. Like how it changes us, how the identity, the trust, how when you love someone that much and being able to let go, that sort of thing. And so I think it's particularly relevant, and it doesn't mean like just women with babies or toddlers, but just anyone who's wanting to, look at that more deeply in themselves.
Mm-hmm.
How motherhood has changed them.
Have you thought about what you would retitle it?
No, I haven't gotten that far. It's not really, I mentioned it to my publisher, but I don't think it's an option. So just going to leave.
Right.
That's one of the hardest things for me. I mean, like being able, someone was asking me this the other day, and it was like, well, I knew the book was done when I was like, I need to rewrite the whole thing now, and it was like, time to let it go.
Right, right. Okay, so you also have done end of life counseling. I think you told me it's not something you're currently doing, but regardless, just how have you found that that relates, or does it in any way to the kind of things that you experienced or learned in birth?
Yeah, I've had the honor of doing hospice work, and I call it an honor because it really, in some ways, it's like being a midwife, for a birth. It's sort of like being a midwife for death. And I think there are so many similarities because, again, it's like facing this great unknown, and that people can talk about it, but especially with death, no one can tell you from the other side, maybe from almost getting there, but it's unknown, and a lot of fear comes up, and a lot of it's a huge transition for the person going through it, as well as for the people that love them. And I think the same is true with birth. And I was twice a hospice chaplain at different times. And one, I was working with people as they were, getting close to death before they died, and often with the family members before and afterwards. And the last job I had was actually on call. So it was overnight or on weekends, mostly going out to people right after they died. So going to people's homes, like within the hour after someone passed, and then I'm doing a blessing, a ritual, and talking with the family members. And whereas, people don't think of birth, as a grieving process, there's a huge change that's happening. It's transformative, and there's so much. There's love, there's connection, there's letting go, there's loss. I mean, these things are true at both, bookends of life. And I think for me, one of the things that draws me to both of them so much is just, these are the times in life when people are the most real, the most raw, the most authentic, when we appreciate and acknowledge what life really is. And so that for me is why, I told people before, like, I would just go on giving birth if I didn't have to raise all those children. Like, I have just the experience of it is it's painful, but it's beautiful, and it makes you so present. And I think being with people as they're dying, and being with their family members it's very real.
Yeah, it's like, and I try to explain this to my clients, and I often struggle with it, but it's like, you are so vulnerable in the labor process, and, your team, and having someone there who's familiar to you, because you are just, it's like all your layers are peeled back, and it is just right down to the core. Like anything you have running in the back of your mind, like I always, please deal with it, because it will come up. Everything will come up.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I can surely see how that would be a parallel. Okay, well, that is about all I had. Julie, is there anything else you want to tell us about the book, or birth, or being real?
I mean, mainly I just want to say about it, I guess, is that it's not another advice book, and that was really important to me, and it's why I wrote it in the first person and just talked about my personal experiences. Is because I really believe that we each, it's really about your own intuition and knowing yourself and doing what you need to do. So that has to do with, the setting, or how you're giving birth, how you're parenting, all those kinds of things. And that I feel really passionately about that, is that I want for myself and for other women to feel empowered to do things your own way, and feel good about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, thank you very much. If anybody has questions, you can go ahead and post them in the Facebook event page, or I think there's a comment section here, and we will definitely try to get to them. Julia, thank you so much for your time. I know you're super busy, so it was great to talk to you. And again, the book, Lessons of Labor, And this is Julia Aziz that we've been talking to. So yeah, I highly recommend it. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.